Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is Shah. We have Dr. Stephen Baskerville with us today, and we're going to be talking about our bids for ACF and OCSS. For those of you guys who aren't familiar with that, we actually did another episode where we did a deep dive into the Administration for Children and Families in the Office of Child Support Services, formerly the Office of Child Support Enforcement. Those are two federal offices that are under the umbrella of the Department of Health and Human Services, and they have pretty far-reaching implications and power over the American family, from child support through much, much more, which we'll touch on a little bit today, but we do want to focus on maybe what we'd change and what we would do differently. Dr. Stephen Baskerville, if you'd like to introduce yourself again, or if you have any words you'd like to say before we get started.
Thanks very much. I'm a scholar of political science and history. I teach at the Collegium Intermarium in Warsaw, and I've been working on these issues of family policy and for about 25 years now, and I've written several books and quite a few articles on the topic. So it's my main interest.
Perfect. Yeah, and just a little bit about me. I used to work at the Department of Child Support Services in Sacramento County in California. So I'm pretty familiar with, the day-to-day and talking to families and seeing how this affects families at a very granular level, as well as being familiar with the program from the federal, the state to county level. And I think maybe we can start with ACF and just you can maybe introduce ACF again to us for the folks who haven't seen our prior discussion, and what it does and what you'd like to see done differently.
Okay. Well, first of all, ACF is the Administration for Children and Families. It's the umbrella group, and it falls within the Department of Health and Human Services. And as many people probably know by now, the new HHS Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., was appointed by Donald Trump and confirmed, I believe, by the Senate already as HHS Secretary. But I haven't heard much from him or from the administration at all about this side of HHS. HHS has two broad sides, broad areas. One is health, and the other is human services. Health, of course, is where RFK Jr. became famous, made a name for himself. He knows that subject in and out, and I wouldn't presume to offer any advice to him on that. But the other broad area that HHS covers is human services or social services, or basically the broad field of social work. The social workers of America are overseen by HHS and by that side. And as far as I know, I'm not aware that RFK Jr. has a huge amount of expertise in this side of HHS. And as I say, I haven't heard anything from the Trump administration. And I think from last time, the Trump administration, the last administration in 2017, I think they neglected this quite flagrantly. They never developed a plausible or an effective and active policy toward families, or a response to the existing policies toward families. And so I just began to realize over the weeks as the administration was developing, that they seemed to be completely neglecting this area of family policy, and which includes things like welfare and child support, child abuse, and things like this. And this is a huge area of government policy that most people don't know about, even people whose lives are directly affected by it, like fathers and parents and divorced couples and foster care providers and teachers and homeschoolers and many people whose family lives are directly affected by HHS and by ACF under it. Really, don't know much about it. It's an area of huge ignorance. I didn't know anything about it before I started looking into it directly. But it is generally the family policy of the federal government, falls within the administration of children and families. And it's a huge budget, it's a huge area. And basically the things that it covers that are most likely to be of interest to your audience, Shah,
Hmm.
the people listening tonight, are probably likely to be welfare policy, and the whole welfare system falls within ACF. And the Office of Child Support Services is the federal government's office for overseeing child support, and the Children's Bureau is their area for overseeing child abuse and child abuse. And I even read that they are also uh, have some jurisdiction over matters of domestic violence. My impression is that most domestic violence policies will fall under the Justice Department as a matter of law enforcement, but it is entirely likely that HHS and ACF are involved in this area also. So this is an area of huge importance to fathers, mothers, parents generally, um, any kind of family that's involved, who's any citizens whose families are affected by government policy, state and local governments or federal government policy are really should know about what's going on here. So, um, as I say, the umbrella group, the broad administration that deals with this is the Administration for Children and Families. The director is a sub cabinet position. It's an assistant secretary of HHS who is whose um, appointment requires confirmation by the Senate. And beneath him or her are the offices that deal with um, child support, OCSS, and child abuse, the Children's Bureau, and presumably some various offices dealing with domestic violence. So I realized that last time during the first Trump administration, again, as I say, the administration neglected this huge area of family policy. And since the election in November, as the weeks go by, I realized that I haven't heard anything out of them. So I realized I think that it sounds like a pretty good idea that they're neglecting it again. And the more I thought about it, I couldn't think about who was likely to be appointed to these positions. There have been some capable people in the past, but there have also been a lot of hacks, a lot of just government functionaries, a lot of career civil servants and bureaucrats and people who just follow the path of least resistance, follow standard operating procedure, and continue doing what they've been doing for decades now. And this is unfortunate because these offices that deal with family policy, they are they have huge power. First of all, I suppose the important thing to say is some people say, well, I didn't know the federal government was involved in family policy in all these areas. And you're right to be surprised because the federal government should not be involved in these things. There's no authorization in the Constitution for the federal government to be involved in any of these areas. And arguably, they should just pull out of all of it and close down these offices altogether. And now that's not what I'm advocating because these offices have been in operation for decades. The Children's Bureau goes all the way back to the New Deal. And
Wow.
some people say that some of the things they did back in the New Deal were good. They had some in the early years. They had some conscientious people who were genuinely concerned with families' welfare and economic problems and various strains on the family. And they did some good. I'll leave that to the historians. But the point is that these offices have been operating for decades now, and they've done, I think, a lot of mischief. I think they've almost all the policies, almost all of them in the last few decades, have been terrible. Somebody once said, if you want to know, if you look at the name of most government agencies, the name of the agency describes what that agency destroys. And if that seems to be the case with the Administration for Children and Families, it destroys children and families.
Yeah, all you
Um,
got to do is look around. I mean, the evidence is everywhere to be seen.
right. So as the weeks ticked by, I decided, well, I don't see anybody going for it. I can't think of too many people
Hmm.
who I think should be in those offices. I've thought of a couple of people I know very, very well, and people who I think could do that job very competently, but they both turned it down and wouldn't do it. So I decided to throw my hat in the ring,
Yeah.
and I said, "Well, I've been watching this stuff for decades now. I think I could be administrator for ACF as well as anyone. And I talked to you. We had done an interview or two,
Mm-hmm.
and I had listened to your other podcasts, and I realized you were very knowledgeable. I was very impressed by listening to your pieces. So I thought, well, why couldn't you run the Office of Child Support Services? And I'm sure you could. So I persuaded you. This was my initiative.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone should know, and I persuaded you uh, to let me put your name forward. And so I did in a couple of tweets and Substack pieces. I suggested that I was going for this post at ACF, and I was proposing you for the job of child support enforcement
Hey,
officer.
why not? You gotta dream big, and you never know if you can get the attention. I think just to chime in what some of you're saying, what some of what you're saying here is that I haven't really heard the administration make any mention of these offices at all. Unless I missed something, but I haven't seen anything. The closest thing I saw recently was that Dodge, headed by Elon Musk, recently got access to some large databases that OCSS, which is Office of Child Support Services, is in charge of managing. So, back in the late 90s, when they created
Yeah.
FPLS, Federal Parent Locator Service, and I think NDNH, National Directory of New Hires, which gets information on all of us, and it stores it in there from where we're working at and addresses and things like that. OCSS actually manages all of that information. And Dodge, who's headed by Elon Musk, recently got access to these databases. So a lot of people were worried or questioning or not sure what he's going to do with them. But the more worrisome part is that they exist in the first place and they collect all this
Yeah.
information on us. But yeah, beyond that, just to recap on OCSS, a lot of what they do is they are in charge of really guiding all of the states' Title 4D program, child support agencies. And they're in charge of allocating the funding and basically putting guidelines on the states and performance measures and auditing the states and seeing how they perform. And then based off of that, they determine how much money goes to the states. So there's a lot of different ways that funding works for a given state to get federal money for their child support program. Off rip, the federal government gives them about 66% of what their cost is to have these things. And then beyond that, Title 4A is what gives out the welfare grants to the states. There's a certain amount of that welfare money that's collected back from child support. So child support really exists in the beginning to collect back welfare money that's given out to a broken family, basically. And of the money they collect, it's supposed to go back to the federal government, but some of it gets held by the state, and then that gets reinvested into their child support program, basically. And then beyond that, they also get incentive payments to work non-welfare cases. So when child support, the federal program started, it was only for welfare cases because the problem was the amount of money being spent for welfare was going up considerably because families weren't staying together. And as we started, hitting into, I think around the 80s, but especially in the mid 90s is where they really got this stuff fleshed out. They started giving incentive payments of federal tax dollars over to agencies around the country to start taking on non-welfare cases. And if you remember from the last episode, one of my biggest pet peeves is that you have a system that's public family law, which goes back a long way, and it's created to deal with folks who are, needing help from the state and kind of become a burden on society in that way. And you have public family law intruding into the realm of private family law and subjecting hardworking middle class and upper class Americans who are not living off the government dime, so to speak, and they're being treated as if they are and subjected to pretty extreme enforcement measures, I'd say. So one of the first things I'd like to see changed is going after these incentive payments for non-welfare cases. I would like to see these agencies, at the very least, focused back into what they were originally created for, which is to retrieve welfare money that's expended out to families. And they used to do that through child support. So when a mom, let's say a single mother, could be a single father, but mostly single moms, go on welfare with the child, they sign away their child support rights to the government, basically. So the government now has the right to collect child support from the missing parent, and then that money is supposed to go back to reimburse the welfare funds. So, a lot of even the other performance measures, it doesn't really break it down between welfare and non-welfare. I mean, you can see that through the audits, but based off of their performance payments and things like that, they're just looking at how much child support's collected. And I mentioned this in the last one, but states don't do that good of a job of collecting welfare monies to begin with. It's a lot easier to collect money from middle class and upper class Americans with above the table jobs. So if we got rid of these incentive payments, all these agencies nationwide would have to think about where they're spending their money, and they really wouldn't focus so much on non-welfare cases to begin with. And then if they're not doing that, then that at least pushes back the state a bit into intruding into private citizens' lives, at least not that easily. So that would be a step back in the right direction. It's a small thing we can do, but I think it can be effective, and it can really start getting the ball rolling and really looking at other stuff. Beyond that, OCSS, it funds research for programs. It also gives funding to different agencies to create different what they'd call fatherhood programs. Although a lot of them are kind of just about getting the guy to work so that they can then collect child support from him later, these kinds of things. Not
Precisely.
Yeah, not the most terrible things, but they kind of really, I think, oversell them a bit. So it kind of comes from this thing of wanting to have fathers involved in their children's lives, but what they're doing isn't really helping them get custody, so to speak. So if we can reinvest that money from these kind of programs that don't do anything effective and create new policies and programs that actually do help people get into their children's lives, and maybe even give funding directly over to courts to give free custody hearings for fathers, or make it at least affordable in the same way that child support is affordable to someone now if they just walk into the agency. I think those would be some effective measures in order to start reallocating how all this stuff works, And then it would give states a little bit more power and decision-making into what they're going to do about non-welfare cases. And I don't know, force them to get creative, basically. But I kind of like this policy of diminishment, And then if you think about, when I think about the Trump administration and I think about, the creation of Dodge and what Elon Musk is doing by trying to save money for the federal government, this would be a great way to do it, because first of all, you're saving these monies from this incentive payments, so that's already a win. But then what you're doing is you're telling the states, hey, focus all of your efforts onto recouping this welfare money, which is what you're supposed to be doing in the first place, and that would actually bring more money back in. So I think it would fit with the overall theme of what the Trump administration wants, if we were gonna keep it that way. So that's my view on what I'd like to see changed, basically.
Okay. Well, you asked me, you asked me last time. I realized I was reviewing our video of the last interview. And by the way, I would refer your listeners to that last video if they want more details about some of these programs. But you asked, one of the questions you asked me, which I maybe might focus on here, is what I would do if I were the Undersecretary of ACF, in charge of family policy. And this is interesting. This I realized I didn't answer the question last time, so I'll try and
this is perfect.
This happen a little better. But one of the, as you were talking, it made me realize, yes, first of all, as you said, it is completely consistent with the Trump administration policy aims to streamline, to cut waste, to cut out needless regulation and so forth in the federal government. And this is a huge, the whole welfare area is not just wasteful. It's not just, people talk about welfare as being bloated, as being wasteful, as full of lazy spongers. But there's much more than that. It's much more, because what it does is it creates a whole host of social problems. The waste and bloat is really a tiny part of the cost of welfare. One of the things that welfare does is, by creating fatherless homes and broken families, it has a multiplier effect. It creates a whole host of social problems, which then cost the federal government even more, in fact, many times more. It is in welfare communities and fatherless communities where you have violent crime, where you have substance abuse, where you have truancy, where you have prostitution, where you have more unwed pregnancies in the next generation. So all of these things cost enormous amounts for budgets for incarceration and criminal justice and education and health care and many other things. So welfare isn't just expensive in itself, it has a multiplier effect, and it causes virtually, I mean, arguably, it causes virtually our entire domestic policy budget goes for the problems associated with the welfare system. So it is absolutely imperative that the Trump administration gets a handle on this. And I've said many times that one of the biggest failures of the first Trump administration was to neglect this entirely. Now, you asked me what I would do if if I were ACF undersecretary. The first thing I said last time, I did mention this briefly. I'll just mention it very briefly here. I would force these agencies all to adhere to the Constitution. I mean, if you're going to be a HHS undersecretary, any job in the federal government, if you're going to be I think if you're going to, wash dishes in the cafeteria, you have to take an oath of office to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, which the majority of our federal officials do not do. Many of the areas that have no constitutional authorization whatsoever. So that's the first thing you have to do. You have to make sure that the policies are strictly consistent with the Constitution. And closely connected with that is you have to make sure that the policies first do no harm, that they are, consistent with the Hippocratic Oath, that they don't do more harm than good, that the medicine isn't worse than the disease. And that's what happens in the case of these policies that are administered by ACF and its underlings, the agencies that fall beneath it. So these things need to be, in many cases, in this case of all these programs I mentioned, child support enforcement, domestic violence, and child abuse. In many ways, as I've argued in print, these problems are not just not relieved, they are exacerbated. And in some instances, they are caused at the root by these agencies and by the programs they administer.
Yeah, very
And
much
then,
so. Oh, sorry. Go on. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
well, that leads to another point that I think is very important. And I've run through this whenever I talk about family policy, or especially when I talk about the family courts or these executive agencies that deal with this issues surrounding family policy. It's very important that any reforms that are brought in not be just a matter of tinkering with the existing system and a matter of trying to make it, quote unquote, more efficient. In other words, the people that are profiteering off family policy, the people that are profiteering off family breakdown and family non-formation and divorce and welfare, they're perfectly willing to say, oh yes, my agency is very inefficient. It's terrible. We really need to make it much more efficient. So that courts or agencies or social work bureaucracies that take children away from their parents and cause families to break down, let's make them more efficient so they can take more children away from their parents and cause more families to break down. Do you see what I'm saying? This is what their proposed reforms always say. They always say, yes, the child support system, the family court system, the domestic violence administration, it's terribly inefficient. It's terribly inefficient right now. I admit this. It's a horrible situation. I'm going to remedy it. First of all, the first thing to do, give me more money.
Yep.
Give me more money, and I'll make it better. See, this is one of the self-serving arguments they make when they pretend to reform something. Give me more money, and I'll reform it.
Yeah.
And then give me more money, and I'll make the system more efficient so that the abuses and the problems that are caused by my agency can be multiplied. We can cause more problems. We can create more abuses. We can steal more children from their parents. We can cause more families to break down. We can put more fathers in incarceration without trial. You see, so you have to scrutinize these reforms. When somebody says they're going to reform something, you have to make sure they're really going to reform it and not just expand it and do more of the chicanery that they're already doing in the first place.
Yeah, I think, that's such a great point, because I think these agencies have grown so robust that they take away Americans sort of opportunity to get this figured out amongst themselves and work through it properly instead of having this laid out path that once they take it, it really diminishes the ability, especially of fathers, to be able to figure out how to get into their children's lives and take a more active role. Especially with child support. Child support is really hard, especially on poorer families, but even on the middle class. And you got celebrities out here that are crying about basically, and out there screaming about how terrible the child support system is on them. Tyrese Gibson is someone I think about. That's a movie actor right there, and he's just dealing with the pains of the 4D system, and there isn't much he feels that he can do. He feels like he's trapped. So, when I look at that, I think if we can at least de-incentivize, or I guess create some incentives for the families to work together to get things figured out before the state barges in and creates a for sure barrier in between them and, ruins families further in that way, that would be a step towards the right place. And, especially when you talk about respecting the Constitution, I mean, I think that's what we got to do there. So, I don't know why the administration doesn't seem to really focus on that or look at that. I don't know if it's just ignorance of the situation or lack of education or what they're afraid of. Maybe it's just they think it's not popular or that it might not get them votes. But part of me does think, I mean, there's enough folks out there that have dealt with this for so long that it could be very popular for them, especially if they're saving money on the one hand and they're taking a position that is, meant to help families in the first place. I hope that's something that we could see from them.
Yeah, that's right. Well, this whole area of family policy is something that most administrations over the years have done their best to avoid. It does take a certain amount of courage, and President Trump is a man of courage. Nobody can doubt that.
Mm-hmm.
So if anyone's going to tackle it, I would think he would. But it does strike fear into the hearts of the most stout men, I should say, especially men. I think part of it is ignorance. It's a whole area that is clouded in obscurity and sometimes deliberate obscurity. It is deliberately covered up. But also, it is an area that is, much of these agencies are controlled by radical feminists, extreme feminists, and they're very good at making any kind of substantive reform, making it out to be anti-woman, or which means it's anti-feminist.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said this is going to harm women, this is going to harm children, this is going to harm the elderly, this is going to saying that you want to cut programs for child support or child abuse,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to say, oh, you're going to have we're going to have more deadbeat dads and more.
That's what they
and more
scare
child
people
abuse.
with. There's going to be more orphans. There's going to be a bunch of homeless kids out there and this kind of stuff. And it's just like, but it's like, at what point do we turn the train around? I mean, do we keep moving forward in this way and creating a bigger problem? Or do we start letting people know, hey, you got to start thinking about family planning instead of waiting on the state safety net to get you out of this? Like, something's got to give here because it's not sustainable.
Absolutely. And just look at the long-term perspective. Look over the decades of, as the fatherhood after numerous fatherhood programs by the Clinton administration and the Bush administration and state governors like Ron DeSantis, they have these fatherhood programs. Has the problem of fatherlessness gotten any better? No. It's only gotten worse. It's only gotten worse. And I can quote you in my recent book. I do quote a number of authorities who say this very clearly, that it continues to be the worst, most serious social problem in America today is fatherhood, the fatherhood crisis. And it hasn't gotten any better at all. It's only gotten worse. And the reason it's getting worse is because the federal government and state governments have vested interest in making it worse. They're making a lot of money on it, and they're perpetuating their own existence. So sooner or later, you have to start, as you say, asking yourself, how much good money do we want to continue throwing after bad? And how long are we going to allow this to continue before somebody starts questioning the basic assumptions of these counterproductive federal programs?
Yeah, and some states too, I mean, a good number of them, they even operate their child support programs on a profit. There's a there's a policy document that I found, and it's just discussing some of the changes that happen with the incentive payments. And one paragraph of it is given this overview of the three streams of money that support state CSE programs, child support enforcement. We can now examine the basic financial operations of the child support system. And then it gives a table that summarizes the incomes and expenditures for each state. And it says the first three columns show state income from each of three funding streams just described. The fourth column shows state spending on child support. As demonstrated in the fifth column, the sum of the three streams of income exceeds expenditure in some 34 states. In other words, most states make a profit on their child support program. States are free to spend this profit in any manner the states see fit. So this is from just a retrospective on child support policy that I've been reading, but it makes a lot of sense, and a lot of that I think has to do with the incentive payments for the non-welfare cases, because those used to be capped, and then it ended up changing. The 1996 welfare reform law required the HHS secretary, that would be what RFK Jr. is doing now, in consultation with the state CSE directors, to develop a performance-based revenue-neutral system of incentive payments and report to the appropriate congressional committee. So they submitted a report, I think it was in March 13th of 97, and it created this kind of the 5 performance measures. And we talked about it last time. There's establishing paternity, establishing court orders, collecting monthly child support, collecting on past due arrears, and then the cost effectiveness. Like, are you bringing more in than it costs to do this? And based off of that, the incentive payments available to each state are based on a percentage of the state's collections, with no cap on non-welfare collections. There used to be a cap on how much they'd get back from the non-welfare collections. But when they changed it in 97, they removed that cap. And, if you look at that, most of the money, again, that these state agencies collect are from non-welfare families, because welfare funds are hard to collect. So when you look at these performance measures, it's allowing them to basically get a return, which is a match of a certain percentage of these non-welfare payments. So they're heavily incentivized to barge into non-welfare families, which is the thing I really focus on. So it's like, the thing I'm trying to get away from is giving these incentive payments to the states to barge into non-welfare lives. I think those people should have to rightfully go through the private family law courts, as it always was, and deal with it that way, and look at it with a fine-tooth comb instead of the bulldozer that is the federal program. And that would help, first of all, because then states, they're kind of running it like a business. They're making a lot of money off of people that have nothing to do with the welfare program to begin with. So I just wanted to read that out from this paper. But that would be one of the first things I'd love to see changed. And, it would have to be approved by the HHS secretary, which is what happened originally. So I think RFK has the power to hear about this stuff and make these decisions, and then look at a different policy for how this money is going to be paid out to the states, and put more responsibility back onto the states, basically, instead of just taking federal taxpayer money to create this cycle of just hurting families and extracting more money from them, and then trying to hit these performance measures so that you can then get more money, and then the state uses this profit on whatever it wants. I mean, it just sounds really bad, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Let me just underscore something you said there. I just want people to understand just how serious this is. You said that most states make a profit on their child support system, and they can spend that money any way they want to. In other words, it is a system of raising revenue. States are using child support to raise revenue in a ways that bypasses the legislature, by the way, largely, which means it's not accountable to the people. So what this means is that states have a financial incentive on broken homes, fatherless children. The more of them there are, the more money the state gets. The state makes money. The more divorces, the more broken homes, the more children's lives are ruined by fatherlessness, and the state makes a profit on this. And where does this profit come from? The profit comes from federal taxpayers. The federal taxpayers are paying this money to the federal government. They give the money to the states. The states fill up their coffers, and they fill up their coffers more, depending on if they have more broken homes and fatherless children and divorces and all this. So and by the way, I might point out that the Attorney General, the state Attorney General, is the officer who is in charge of maximizing this state revenue. So whether it's a liberal Democrat like Kamala Harris or a conservative Republican like Josh Hawley, they can say anything they want about being family friendly and so forth. They're going to maximize this revenue and they're going to destroy as many families as they
It's
possibly
really a
can.
double problem, right? Because I look at the child support involvement as a kind of pseudo welfare or a pseudo wealth transference from the fathers to this other broken side of once they break the family, then they do a wealth transfer over. And on the one end, you have federal tax monies that are going for these incentive payments and these kinds of things that make states profitable. On the other hand, it's like a double problem. It's like you have that, then you also have this wealth transfer coming from individual men on this granular level from the non-custodial parent, as they call them. And I think it just hurts. It hurts the state of family even more because on the one end, there's the welfare state here. On the other end, it's really diminishing what the father can do on his own other than what the state is directing him to do. And then with this incentive built in to do this more and more and more and as much as you can in order to get this money, it's a recipe for disaster. So I don't know. I would love to see RFK Jr., the Trump administration, or someone kind of look at this. I mean, even Dodge look at this and say, okay, what's really going on here and what changes can we make to try to fix some of these problems. I think families need to be re-incentivized to work together instead of running to the state and just saying, give me some money. And it's just not sustainable again. I mean, and men are kind of throwing in the towel left and right as we look. And it really is due to these, what I would call an oppressive system. I don't mean to throw that word around, but you see a lot of guys that are abandoning, wanting to even create families or marriage and all this kind of stuff altogether. And it's like, if you don't fix this stuff, I don't even see how we can get this whole, boat turned back around in another direction we need to go. It's not looking good.
No, you're absolutely right. And someone like Josh Hawley is very interesting. He writes a book scolding young men for not marrying. He says, you've got to man up and you've got to marry and start families and have children and all this. And he sounds like a school marm, like a Aunt Sally, scolding men for being naughty and not married. Well, the men understand what's going on here.
Yeah.
If they marry and have children, they can lose their children, they can lose their home, they can lose their income, they can lose their everything they possess, and they can be incarcerated without trial, and they can then be turned out on the street where they live the rest of their life in homelessness. Now, who's going to marry under those circumstances?
Yeah. I
Now,
mean, sorry to
I
interrupt. Please
don't.
go ahead.
No, I just and I think you're right. I think RFK Jr., Secretary Kennedy, has I'm sure he has his plate full. He's got a huge agenda that he's trying to enact on the healthcare side of HHS, which is badly in need of reform, and I'm sure he's got his hands full with that. So whoever becomes Undersecretary of ACF is going to have a huge role in this administration, or could have a very important job in leading and spearheading any reform effort, because I don't think Secretary Kennedy is on top of this, frankly, that it's a high priority for him.
Yeah.
But that it should be a high priority, or it has not been a high priority for any health secretary in recent memory. I would emphasize once again that back in the 70s up through the 80s, welfare reform was a number one issue for Republicans. People talked about it. Some of the finest intellectuals in America were constantly talking about welfare reform, and it was never reformed. It was just dropped in the 90s, again, partly because the feminists took control of it, and made it a positive, something that they saw as empowering women, even though it was destroying cities and poor regions and families and I think the entire United States society. So no, I think somebody needs to shore up this side of, maybe not shore up is the right word. Somebody needs to pay attention.
Yeah, at the very
Stop
least.
neglecting this side of HHS's responsibility, and see what the federal government is up to, and get it under control, because it's right now it's just out of control.
Yeah, a lot of this too, kind of, you mentioned the history there, and I'm glad you did, because it was a bigger topic of conversation, especially back then. But I think a lot of what we're dealing with now is maybe they took the kind of duct tape solution back then in the mid 90s and even before that, and just kind of, it ended up kicking the can down the road, and it just kind of made the problem worse. And one thing that could be an issue for a lot of these folks that are in power now is that if they open up this can of worms, it will be, pretty difficult to deal with. But the longer that they don't deal with it, it's only going to get worse. And they just seem to be avoiding this because I think the reason it doesn't get media attention is because this really is an actual problem that nobody wants. This is the elephant in the room, truly.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. And, this is the other thing that's alarming about this is the level of public ignorance. As I say, this was a major top priority for Republicans and conservatives up through the 80s and into the early 90s. But today, most Republicans and conservatives not only don't, it's not a priority for them, but they don't even know anything about it. They're completely ignorant. And I would just add also that Democrats, also liberal Democrats, were also in favor for different reasons of welfare reform. They weren't happy about it either back then. There were discussions among them about how to reform it better, and they too have dropped it. I think because the old left has kind of aged and died out, and it's been replaced by the new left, who's more concerned with sexual issues and woke issues, and I think is much more conservative. So both the left and the right have become very irresponsible and have, as you say, dropped the ball on this entirely. And it's just festering behind the scenes and eating away at our society, making every other problem worse. And it's going to continue until someone does something about it. And I fear it could undermine all of Trump's efforts at bringing costs and bureaucracies under control.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that unless there's more stuff that you want to focus on, we definitely can. But maybe we can head into kind of discussing maybe what folks can do and reaching out to the White House or sending an email or even a handwritten letter over there. I'll add that in the description, a contact number, but 202-456-1111. That'll get you to the White House. And, I'll put that on screen here for us. I can't do it now, but I'll do that when I edit it. And I think really it's up to people to create some kind of an uproar about this while we can. I applaud what the folks are doing in the administration trying to figure things out. From what I've seen about RFK, I think he's focused a lot on health and the food industry and stuff like that. It would be nice to kind of hear what his policy plans are for this. But I think if folks start reaching out and sending letters and, say, hey, reach out to Dr. Baskerville, take a look at this video. Let me link this and see what this is Shah's got to say about child support. Maybe we can get somebody's attention, or if you know somebody that, knows any of these folks, I think it can really, really help.
Well, absolutely. I think so too. I would urge your listeners to listen to our previous video. I assume you'll put up the link to that as well.
I'll add that in the description.
We describe we outline and describe all of this in a little more detail in that video. But like I say, by default, I've put my hat in the ring for the Assistant Secretary for Administration for Children and Families. I've persuaded you to go for the job of the Office of Child Support Services.
I mean, yeah, wherever I can, I would do that. I think we'd make a great team there, and I think we could convince RFK, and RFK can probably put in a good word, with Trump and say, hey, this is what we got to do. The people are asking for it,
Right. So. And I've been searching for someone who might be a good candidate to head the Office of the Children's Bureau. The Bush administration had a pretty good director of that, Susan Orr, back in the early 2000s. But since then, they haven't done very much in the way of reform. So I've reached out, like I said in the last video, there's a pretty good literature on the abuse of child abuse laws, innocent families who've been victimized by child abuse laws. And so I reached out to a couple of scholars and journalists who wrote some of that literature and see if they would like to head the Children's Bureau. Or find somebody who's knowledgeable about the real causes and the real solutions to child abuse. So maybe we could find someone who would be good. But in the meantime, I would urge your listeners to call or write to the White House and put forth your name for the Child Support
Mm.
Services Administration and my name for the Administration for Children and Families, and generally pay if they don't want to make these appointments, to at least start taking these offices more seriously,
Yeah.
and make sure that they are headed by knowledgeable, conscientious people who are willing to undertake serious and effective reforms.
Perfect. Well, I think that puts a cap on it real nicely. So once again, this is Shah. This is Dr. Stephen Baskerville. If you guys haven't already, you might want to check out some of his works available on Amazon. Taken into Custody, and the newer one is Who Lost America, which just came out just last year, I think. So if you guys haven't read those already, please give those a read for a deep dive into what's really going on. We'll catch you on the next one. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe and check the description for the contact information for this administration. So hopefully we can get some change made. Thank you.